Welcome to CyberSessions by CIISec. This episode is about life inside the world's largest consultancies. Please enjoy the episode.
Hello everybody, I'm Nick Seaver. I'm here to host a podcast about the life inside the world's largest consultancies, and I'd like to introduce the two guests we've got to talk to today, Jitender Arora and Reg Lee.
Hi, I'm Jitender Arora. You can call me Jit. I'm the North-South Europe CISO at Deloitte. I came from financial services and joined Deloitte around 5 years ago.
Hi, I'm Reg Lee, and I'm from KPMG. I'm the Business Information Security Officer. And like Jitender, I also came from a financial services background and joined KPMG about 4 years ago.
And Reg, can you provide a bit of an overview on your role at KPMG, what it entails?
So yeah, I'm the Business Information Security Officer, and it covers a couple of roles. One is the governance, risk and control, where we look at the sort of security of running the unit that I'm in, and also the other part of it is supporting the client-facing teams. So when they have queries from the client or how they interact, how they work securely.
And Jit, is your role in Deloitte similar?
My role is a bit different compared to the BISO role. Basically, even though we are from professional services firm, my role is not about interacting with clients. This is about defending Deloitte against all kinds of external threats or internal threats, running from GRC, security operations, architecture engineering, and providing also advice and guidance to our business when they are building digital assets, or in some cases we also have a conversation with the clients when, example, some of our partners come along to say how Deloitte does it. So it's about defending the organization and making sure we are able to secure ourselves from against external or internal threats.
And can I ask both of you, when you decided to get into cyber, was that a deliberate decision or by accident?
I'll go first. I'm a computer science and engineering graduate, so it was, I would say, accidental, because I started my career in technology infrastructure services, I'm basically Unix administrator by background, so microsystems. It was very much about building Unix farms, servers, working in data centers. And around that time, around 2001 or so, the organization I used to work for, they were starting a security practice, which was very much about firewalls, Nokia, Checkpoint, Cisco PEGs, and literally working on the infrastructure side of the security technologies. And they said, who's interested? Kind of I raised my hand and ended up joining security, and the life changed after that.
And Reg?
Yeah, so I feel old now because I joined. I joined the sort of Royal Holloway at a master's when it was still Fred Piper, Professor Fred Piper, teaching the masters at Royal Holloway. Coming out of Reading University, I did similar to Jitender, I suppose, a computer science and statistics degree. And I liked the idea of what I learned in the computer science about the sort of kernel security and things like that. And I was looking around to do something in the sort of field, and found Royal Holloway. It was the second year of the master's course, so going quite far back. Just never looked back. I think it was learning about all the different aspects of it, the crypto, and it was a great foundation.
And I think both of you have come from financial services into big four consultancies. Can you talk a little bit about what is unique about the big consultancies and being a BISO or a CISO in those consultancies?
See, financial services, I have worked in different types of financial services organizations, starting from retail bank, credit card processing to investment bank. The one thing with, and I used to always tell my people that, working in financial services, when you're handling and processing the customer data, you're handling the money of the of the citizens and everything else, there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with it, and that's why there's a heavy regulation in the financial services compared to professional services. It's a very different mindset in terms of the attacker landscape, threat landscape, who was interested in the organizations, versus professional services, which is, sometimes people think of us as consulting, but reality is we have one part of the business which is audit, which is heavily regulated business, type of the business. Tax and legal, again, very different, versus consulting and risk advisory. So working in consultancies is a very different challenge, just because you have concept of micro organizations, and microcultures under one big banner. And every organization has every different type of the business has different challenges that comes along. And how do you keep a balance about the pace, agility of the organization, and also the regulated part of the business? So I think it's an interesting challenge.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, for me, the regulatory part of working in financial services, I felt gave the, I suppose, the clout, and the actual, like for the CISO, in those organizations, the actual backing to do what they need to do to keep the bank secure. And I learnt a lot about that. And I think going to financial services for me was also about working with, taking that knowledge and trying to help the financial services, so the actual professional services side, bring that discipline into it. So, and unlike Jitender, I look after the consulting bit of KPMG, and for me it was really trying to help explain that discipline within the security field.
And I think one more thing I would say is, before joining Deloitte, I understood the partnership model, but didn't live and breathe it. It's a very different mindset. It's a different kind of construct of the governance and the organization. So you are trying to tell the partners who own the business, actually the owners of the business, about the things that may not be the right thing for us to do. So I think it requires a very different level of influencing. A lot of that is based on relationship management, good conversations, rather than saying, hey, board said that and we had to do it, which is very different in financial services.
That's actually, one of the big differences I see from people who join, KPMG from outside, is if they've never worked in a partnership, they bring in the way they work in a limited company, where there's a structure there, and it's almost like a hierarchical structure. And they find it very difficult to try and translate that into, there's like, why doesn't it work? We've told them, or the risk board have said, and it's like, well, you've got to try and explain it to the partners, right? And sometimes they think that partners don't understand risk, and it's actually the converse of that. I think partners that know a lot more about risk because they directly own the business. It's very different from, say, where we used to work in financial services companies.
Yeah, correct.
And from the top of the organisation, so you're, I guess you're consulting executive or the board and the executive. How much attention does cyber get? I mean, how seriously do these firms take it?
Quite a lot, actually. I think the main thing is, as our CEO talks about cyber being an existential risk, because, see, it's very important we pay attention, because we provide cyber risk advisory services to our clients. And being the market leader in this space, our clients expect nothing else but the best services from us. And in the same way, when we are processing their information, how do we handle that information? For example, tax and legal handle a lot of PII data. Similarly, other parts of the business in M&A, we handle a lot of confidential information. So handling that in a responsible way is something which is expected out of us. So I think executives are very clear that if there is one risk which can make it very difficult for us to operate in the business and which can hurt the trust, credibility of the organization, is actually a cyber risk.
Exactly, yeah. The cyber risk is always up there, and unfortunately or fortunately for us, almost every day there's some incident happening in the world, that brings it up, and it's that Sunday afternoon, where someone's read it in their newspaper, and then it's like they contact you either immediately, they don't even wait till Monday to just message you and go, I just read about this, what is the, are we vulnerable to this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, why do hackers always attack on a Friday evening?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think not just that, I think what's happening is, at least, I'm sure Reggie will be facing the same, there's a new zero-day vulnerability comes along, which is happening a lot more frequent occurrence if you think about 3 years ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And the moment a zero-day vulnerability comes along, we start receiving questionnaires from some of our big clients and their security departments.
We do see that, yeah.
Even though their security departments are struggling to manage that vulnerability, within 24 hours, we have to start responding how we are taking care of those 0 days and whether clients are impacted or not. So I think the movement is quite rapid in this space,
Yep.
and everything is changing at a given point in time. So that is, it's almost like it's never off your mind, because there's always something happening in this area.
Exactly. The other thing that someone a long time said to me, much wiser than, is that the hackers are working 24/7. They only need to get through once, right? Whereas we are salaried, and we work 9 to 5, or our staff work 9 to 5, and the defenses are there, but they just need to be successful once.
Yeah.
So could you give me some idea of the sort of threats you're facing and dealing with day to day? What's worrying your teams? What sort of stuff you're having to handle on a day to day basis?
Yeah. See, the main thing about the threat landscape is, I think threats have always been there, but I think the frequency and the speed and the agility is changing quite a lot. Supply chain issues are becoming a lot more prominent. And when I say supply chain, what that means is that attackers, I think sophistication of attackers, especially the nation state sponsored and some of the financial motivated groups, have always been there. But what I'm seeing is they love the smartness in the way attackers are going about it. So instead of going after organizations which have got big budgets, good security controls, they have got the latest tooling, they have got big teams, instead of trying to attack each and every organizations, look at the common denominator, a software house, a tool or technology which is used by most of these organizations, and going after them. That's why we saw SolarWinds, we saw MoveIt, we saw Log4j. So really going after that, and that suddenly, if you're able to compromise one small software house which is used by everybody else, now you have got the entry point in all the organizations. So I think we are seeing that level of smartness happening, to say return on the investment from the attacker standpoint. And also what we are also seeing is that it's the way threat landscape is changing. We are seeing zero-day vulnerabilities coming out quite a lot. So if you would have asked me 3 years ago how many zero-day we used to see, it was not at that frequent occurrence. Now almost every month we see a zero-day vulnerability happening, which means we are very busy. We have to respond very, very quickly in those cases, not just fixing the assets. Working in Deloitte, in professional services, you have to also handle client queries. So if a zero-day comes along, within 24 to 48 hours, we start receiving queries from the clients, from the big organizations, to say whether Deloitte is impacted, what are we doing about it, how we are fixing it. So we just don't have to fix it on our side, but also give assurance to our clients and customers that we are handling it diligently, and whether there is an impact to our clients or customers. So I think it's both sides, in the sense the way threat landscape is evolving quickly, but the speed and the agility which is needed, but also being able to respond very, very quickly.
Yeah, and for what I've seen, the attackers just have to be, successful once, right? And we have staff that are, salaried, or they work, shift hours, and and they always attack. They seem to always attack us sort of just before the holiday period.
Yeah.
And we're, in America, especially now, coming up to the Black Friday sort of weekend and things like Thanksgiving. So we probably, the worry is that there's a 4-day holiday, and therefore they'll attack the night before, and they know that it's a skeleton crew usually. So, yeah.
And I think another thing which is happening is the attack surface is becoming much bigger. Because earlier you used to have everything running in the data center, people are sitting in the office. So the concept of network perimeter existed. Now you're talking about cloud proliferation. You have, SaaS applications you're using things in different clouds, hybrid working, people are connecting to the access points, sitting in conferences, home, shared accommodations and things like those. So attack surface has become quite significant. And how do you manage that? And then again, as Reg said, it has to go wrong only once. We have to think about, right, people will click on the phishing link. Sometimes people give out the credentials away. Sometimes, things may go wrong, which you're not expecting that to be. But that's why this concept of assume breach scenario is very clear. And that's what have been trying to socialize with the board and everybody else, in the sense that it's not just about prevention, because otherwise you're going to kill the agility of the business if you try to prevent everything from happening. So it's a fine balance between the user experience, cost, and the security to make sure that how they're working hand in hand.
Thanks. And a bit of a crystal ball question, I'm afraid. But if I read a lot about excitement of things like generative AI, crypto, quantum computing. If you were to have a bit of a guess on what you and your teams would be worrying about in 10 years' time that'll be different from today, what are the things that are just chatter now that you think will be taking up a lot of your time 5 or 10 years down the line?
Oh, wow.
10 years' time.
10 years. Want to go, Reg?
I mean, there's chatter about AI, and I think, for me personally, I think AI is very different from what we're seeing today, which is the ChatGPT large language model. I think AI would be more regular and everyday occurrence. Yeah, but I can't think of, I can't. The attack surface will be, will be multiplied up by then, and everything would just be faster. That's my gut reaction.
Yeah.
Yep.
And my view is, first of all, I think in cyber, it just feels 10 years is a very long horizon.
Yes.
Over the last 5 years, I have seen things changing so rapidly. I think what generative AI is giving us, I think people, we have been using machine learning and we have been using data analytics and everything else in building the tools and products, which is there to defend the organization. The thing is, attackers have also got access to all these capabilities. So I call it, sometimes when I have to speak to students, I explain them that our jobs sometimes feel like Tom and Jerry cartoon,
Yeah.
like when we were growing up. So there's always something happening. So you're running, Tom is what I think is the attackers who are always going after us, and we are not offensive. We are on the defense side. We are trying our best with the limited resources and budgets and everything else we have to make sure we are defending the organization to the best of our abilities. With generative AI coming in, quantum computing and everything is evolving, I think the pace with which things are going to happen is going to change drastically.
Yeah, okay.
And I think over the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to see that we have to change in terms of the speed and agility with which we have to respond to those things, because this will become much more frequent occurrence where we are handling different types of attack or different kind of challenge or different kind of problems very quickly. But quantum computing, I personally also think that's the one thing which is a long horizon thing. We have to start thinking about that now in terms of what that means, working with the research organizations, working with the government agencies, and making sure that some of the products and capabilities we are building, we're thinking about those risks now, because when that start materializing, and then we will think about it, it's the same thing, security by design principle, it'll be too late by that time.
I think one thing that struck me when you were saying there was a lot of the compromises are with and breaches are with things that have been designed and installed a while ago before, so we need to fix forwards to prevent it happening. And then as technology is sort of the technical debt, diminishes, I think that will help, because some of these weaknesses, I think there was a sort of Cisco OS sort of breach where they looked back and it's been around for a long time in various systems. But are those devices going to be patched? You might patch the ones where they're working in sort of professional services or FS, but the smaller mid-sized businesses will probably they have this device, it's sitting in a cupboard, it's never going to be looked at. The IT guy may have left, or may be someone's part-time job, and therefore it's harder to it's those pockets, I suppose. Something like an internet background radiation, of these attacks are just legacy items sitting around in the background.
Yeah, and I also think there is another dimension to it in security, which sometimes we don't talk about, which is operational team fatigue. There are so many vulnerabilities out there. There's so many challenges we have. An operational team have to keep the lights on. They have to keep the operating system up to date. They have to keep applications up to date. There's a demand coming from the business to do new things. So while they have to keep the business moving forward, keep the lights on, and then you have got a lot of vulnerabilities happening, which sometimes requires the downtime. They need to test it, because you don't want to apply a patch which is going to bring one of the critical applications down. So operational teams, which are not sitting within the security function, but sitting in the infrastructure operations applications team, they have a lot of fatigue right now. With limited resources, they're trying to do a lot. And I think that fatigue leads to the technical debt, which Reg was talking about, because while you have to keep working on the new exciting things, you have to also make sure that you're taking the hygiene very seriously for everything that you have running.
I think your question about a 10-year horizon, though, is interesting, because the attacks happen quickly. The evolving threat factors happen, evolve quickly. But one thing for me is the funding cycle for, our programs of work, etc., are 2-3 year cycles. And so how do you respond dynamically to that, in that time frame?
And if there was a bit of advice you wished someone had given you before you moved from banking to the Big Four about the roles you were taking on, what would that have been? What do you wish you'd known before you...
Shall I take this one first?
Yeah.
For me, I had worked in another professional services. So before joining KPMG, I had worked with PwC in the past, and so I kind of knew what I was getting back into. And partly for me again the drive for, I just like working with clever people. I think my feeling is that the professional services teams, they hire clever people to work in there, because they need the actual logistics, or the resource is the people. So it's not like in banking where we're selling a loan or a mortgage or something to actually. So in that sense, I just thought I wanted to come back in to work with clever, intelligent people, share ideas and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
but that's for me.
There's something I tell my people all the time who are joining from the corporate world, coming into partnership, which is, it's a very different mindset. So Reg talked about in banks you have loans, savings accounts, credit, and everything else. Basically, it's a well-defined products, well-defined services, a well-defined organization structure, well-defined corporate governance structure.
Yep.
So everything is very well-defined because the nature of the businesses. Then you come to professional services, or basically I say it's organized chaos. What that means is, now the reason professional services firms are successful because of the entrepreneur mindset. Because you are basically an entrepreneur. Everybody's running their own P&L. We respond to the market changing conditions very, very quickly, whether it's climate change, whether it's COVID, and when everybody had to pivot to the complete remote working, we were advising a lot of organizations how to make that happen. So the strength and the of Big Four or any professional services is an entrepreneur mindset, which basically means agility, which means there is a good structure, but that structure can change from time to time. Basically I call this the flexibility in the structure to respond to market changing conditions, and also going after the new opportunities which may emerge in the market. So you can't criticize partners and people to be able to have that flexibility and being able to do that very quickly, rapidly. So that's why the demand comes very rapidly. So the response time in which you have to respond to the needs of the clients or the customers or the partners is also very, very different. So it's a very different mindset in terms of how do you operate. And also influencing. I personally feel the way you influence in a corporate governance structure is very, very different in a partnership model.
Yeah.
It's a very, very different mindset in terms of how do you go about decision making, how do you go about building consensus. While you have a CISO role, where my role is North-South Europe, which means I'm taking care of 28 countries. And cultural mindset, you have to really be very sensitive towards a culture, an example in Middle East versus in Netherlands versus in UK versus in other regions. So that's where I think it's a complex mindset.
Yeah.
It's a complex operating way. So you have to flex your style depending on which part of the business, which countries, which culture you're talking to.
I like the fact, though, for me at least, that I brought the discipline of working in the sort of financial services into the role that I'm in. Just knowing and being able to talk about, actually, the client is looking for this. Having worked in the financial service, I kind of know, if you get a questionnaire or query from a client, this is actually what they're looking for. Or, this response won't be suitable. So we can bring that. I think that's been quite powerful for me in my role, to try and explain that. It brings credibility as well when you talk about these relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's the main, Reg made that point very accurately. Professional services is a lot about trust and the credibility, because clients and customers come to us with complex problems. They don't come to us with easy problems, they come to us with the complex problems. And the reason they come to us with complex problems, because they trust in the brand, in the organization, because we are experts. And when you are handling, when they're dealing with us, they need to be confident. And that's why cyber risk or any other issue that can jeopardize our trust and the brand reputation in the market, I think that's an important aspect for us to look at.
Thanks. And the final question for me, for our viewers, listeners earlier on in their career, what tips would you give people starting off in a cybersecurity career?
Wow, that's a long topic. I think one thing, I feel I have the privilege of speaking to students quite a lot. I go to universities and talk to them, and whenever I get invited to talk, I generally don't talk about security at all, because I talk about one of the other skills which are not taught in the, because university is doing a great job in, getting the subject matter expertise, the crypto or engineering, and getting them up to speed on the topic. But when you enter into a corporate world, so I was thinking about when university asked me to come to students about it, and I was thinking, what would have helped me sitting in that side, which somebody would have told me, which basically means, how do you go about communicating? What are the different skills? There's a lot of skills and behaviors which are required to be successful in the corporate organization or in consulting as well, which is a problem-solving mindset, analytical mindset, art of possible. One thing I try to embed in my people, everybody who comes from outside, is having this how can I help mindset. Because business, we are there to help and serve the business being successful. Effectively, security is a cost center. We are not making money. We are basically there to help and serve the business. We are defending the revenue, not making the revenue. So how to go about helping our people? So having that mindset, having that empathetic mindset, and having that solution-driven approach, I think that's very, very important. The another thing I talk about a lot is, which is very important, is there will always be finite amount of resources. The time is finite. Problems are immense. So how do you handle stress? How do you make sure that these competing priorities, how do you get to a point where you're comfortable with not responding to a few emails and going back to your family in the evening? It's a very important mindset to be able to prioritize, because in cyber, everything might be working and a new 0 day comes along. You have to stop everything and respond to that. Everything is working fine, and suddenly an incident happens on Friday. Reg talked about, right? Happens at the time that you don't want, Friday evenings, Christmas holidays. When we're heading downtime, suddenly we see more. So how do you handle that competing challenges that you have?
Yeah, for me, it's the advice I'd give someone starting out in this industry at the moment is probably listen, take absorb as much information in, and you may not know. Come back to your sort of earlier question about 10-year horizon. You may. If we think back 10 years ago, what we know now and then what's happened back then is very different. And so, just listen, absorb as much information, read or watch as much as you can, and I think keep your ear to the ground. Coming to the CIISec conference, there was a keynote at the beginning of the day about space. Quite a few of those things I'd not thought about in terms of the threats to satellites, but I'd worked previously in a mobile phone organization, and for me it was like that. I was thinking it through. It's similar to having your cell site data or your data, your cell in space, all right, and the constellation of network satellites up there in space. And so it's very similar to how you would defend that. Obviously, you still if you were underground and you had a mobile network, you could actually still get to those sites, but they're remote. They're still also vulnerable to weather effects and things like that, and people, breaking in to try and steal the copper or something like that. So, it was just an interesting, sort of mental shift of going, okay, that is very similar to those sort of things.
And one thing I also say is, be comfortable with the change, because the threats we face, the landscape it is, technology, the way it is evolving, what we know today will change. It means when I started my career as a network security person, I would not have thought I would become a CISO of one of the big four at that time, and the challenges I will face are very, very different. So be comfortable with the change, because generative AI is going to bring very different kind of challenges at us. Quantum computing we talked about, who knows, where this landscape is going to shift, and we have to constantly learn, constantly evolve, and that's why there's a value of organization like CISEC, which in the sense that learning from the community and learning from the peers and understanding, how things are shaping and constantly learning and being comfortable with the change, because who knows, forget about 10 years, 2 years, it's going to be very different.
Yeah, and for me, having sort of lost my sight as an adult, it's coping on a personal level with change, adapting, learning. It's been a journey, and I think just keeping up to date in different formats also has helped, and that diversity is really important.
Thank you both. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I'm Nick Seaver.
I'm Jitender Arora.
I'm Reg Lee. Thank you.